I wanted to start out tonight talking about what looking within actually means. So we all know what looking out feels like, where we are looking to life to make us happy, give us what we want. So we're looking outside of ourselves, outside of this body-mind, let's say, for something outside in the world to fulfill our desires, needs, wants, whatever. Okay, so we can think of, I'm looking out there for to earn a living. I'm looking out there for other people to tell me what I am. I'm looking out there for a relationship to give me love. I'm looking out there for other people to give me respect. I'm looking out there for security, someone to pay my salary. So when we're looking for something outside, there's sort of a perceived lack that we're trying to fill, right? Makes sense, right? So we're looking outside for something to fill something that we sense inside. Something's totally justifiable, right? Like nice to have a roof over our heads, nice to have a few dollars in the bank, food on the table. So those are perfectly fine desires, ways of looking at the world to fulfill certain needs. Some of the other ones are less reliable, right? When we're looking to other people to satisfy some psychological need that we feel. They may or they may not, but when we're dependent on that, then we're dependent. We're dependent on however that other person may show up at any time. Not reliable. So we're sort of, what do they call it in the trade when they're talking about trade deals where they've outsourced our happiness to somebody else. Somebody else will fulfill that for me. So when we hear, we're all pretty clear about that. But then we hear a phrase like looking within, like that's the solution, to look within. And what we first encounter when we first sit down to start to meditate is we look within and we find the inner world is as complex and challenging as anything that we can find in the outer world. There's as many things to see, there's as many problems to solve, there's as many challenges in the inner world as there are in the outer world. We're no longer dependent on someone else's opinions about us. We can do that all by ourselves. We can create judgments for ourselves and then try to live up to that. We can have opinions about ourselves. We can have beliefs about how the world should be treating us and how that feels on the inside. So when we take the instruction to look within, that's been around for a few thousand years, when we take that instruction too literally, we're confronted with basically the psychological world. And you can spend a long time trying to sort that one out. Anybody try to sort of solve everything on the psychological?
Fantasy.
Yeah. You can spend the rest of your life doing that. So one way to look at this looking within instruction is as we come in from the outside, okay, what is on the outside, I've come to realize isn't the source of ultimate peace, happiness, resolution. So I'll look inside, but it's sort of like coming back in, but if we, rather than going all the way into the psychological world and thoughts and feelings, if we just stop right at that interface. Okay, so at that point, just at that sort of 0 point on the teeter-totter, right? So we're no longer looking outside, and before we get all wrapped up into all the thought patterns and emotional and past traumas and everything that we could look to try to resolve on the inside, but just on that interface as we come back in, is to just pause there. So what does that feel like? So we're no longer looking to the outside to solve anything, but we're also not going to memory or thought, because those are, they feel like they're more interior to us, but they're actually more objects within consciousness. But if we see those as, okay, the one thing that they have in common is that they all require memory to dredge them up into current consciousness. Right? In computer terms, it's pulling it out of the hard drive back up into active memory. So that thought, that belief, that feeling, we have to pull it up into active memory, and then we have that thought, we have that experience. Not that we're the ones pulling it up, but that it arises up into consciousness. So, but if we pause right at that interface, where we're not looking to the outside to resolve anything, but also we're not looking inside, where we're thinking we have to pull up these thoughts and beliefs and resolve it at that level. But just at the interface, not looking to the outside, not looking to thought on the inside. Thought can still be there. We're just pausing before we get there. Does that make any sense at all? Mm-hmm. So we haven't changed anything. We haven't changed anything on the outside, and we haven't changed anything on the inside, but we just paused at a 0 point. So we're not trying to change anything, we're not trying to manage anything. We're just noticing that point where instead of looking this way, and before we start looking this way, there's just a pause. It's not actually that similar in some ways to the whole idea of past and future, and then there's just this moment in between those two, where it's actually not possible to think about the moment. Any thought comes afterwards. But just in that present, continuous present moment is similar to what I'm talking about here in terms of it being a 0 point, where thought just can't penetrate it. You can experience, obviously we all do every day, right? All the time. Anybody ever get out of the present moment? As hard as spiritual people try to stay present, has anyone ever managed? I mean, the worst that happens is we think about something that is no longer physically present there, some past experience. But when we're thinking about it, is the present moment, So it's similar in that way, just that 0 point where before thought comes in and when we're no longer looking to the outside, just that quiet spot, no effort, right? We're not attempting to improve anything, we're not changing our karma, we're not trying to do enough good deeds to get to the present moment. It's just that pause, just that quiet spot where it doesn't actually require effort, but it does require just noticing. That's it. So what is it of value that we have the opportunity to notice in that quiet spot? So I'd suggest what's possible to notice there, actually the whole value of science and spirituality and religion, and is an opportunity to see what happens when we're not trying to make something else happen. You know, the rest of our life we're always trying to make something else happen, right? Make something happen on the outside, trying to manage our affairs, even worrying about the future. We think somehow that'll make things better sometime down the line, or try to rewrite the past, tell ourselves the story enough times that we come up with a better ending, or at least one where we were justified. And so we can do those things, but in that just moment, it's all good already. And we have the opportunity to notice what is already present. Because in that moment, we're not trying to change anything. We're not trying to manage anything of the future. All of that requires thought. It requires us to go back into memory, to go back into imagination. But if we're just present to that moment, we see, okay, in that moment, there's still aliveness here, right? Still breathing. It's okay.
Seems more peaceful to me.
It's peaceful, yeah. What disturbs the peace?
Thoughts.
There you go. Yeah, we can do it to ourselves, right? I mean, we can be sitting in a quiet room in the morning, beautiful spring day, hands on the bird feeder, cup of tea, sitting there, and nothing else is happening, and we can remember some disturbing event, maybe from the day before, maybe from 20 years ago, and we can bring it up into current memory, right? And it has a physiological effect on the body. Amazing. It's not happening there. The cup of tea is still there, the birds are still there. The only place in the entire universe it's happening is within these body minds. Extraordinary. I mean, that's the power of thought. It's actually not the power of the thought, it's the power of the believed thought. That's what gives it juice. If it's just a random thought, but if we believe the thought, that has power. It can have power 20, 30 years later, right? Something shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have done it to me. It was wrong. I was the victim. I was taken advantage of. I was misunderstood. We can hang on to that for a long, long time. And who suffers? Yeah. So we can really look at the whole constellation of beliefs that we have about ourselves and what those effects are on us, how we look at ourselves, how we look at life, how we decide that somehow, I'm not loved by the universe, I'm not worthy. Somehow I have to earn something. I have to do something to be worthy of just even being here. I have to do something to earn feeling loved. That's a powerful belief. Huh? And what's possible to recognize in just these sort of zero gravity moments is what we actually are. And in those moments, before we bring up a storyline and tell ourselves, oh yeah, that's right, I am this old, I'm a man or a woman, I've got this career, I've got these beliefs, I've got these relationships. Before we bring that story to bear, there's just this simple sense of beingness already present. We're not attaining anything. We're just noticing what's already there. We didn't do anything to deserve it because it's already present. So at first glance, that simple recognition of aliveness, of being present without actually really trying, it doesn't feel like much because there's nothing there really for the mind to grab onto. It's not, there can be a blissful component to it, there could be an ecstatic component to it. But that's the side effect, actually. We attribute that as, oh, I had this moment of awakening and it was mind-blowing and it felt great. That's the experience of a moment. And that peak spiritual experience, like all other experiences, will come and will go. It may be revealing, we may learn to see things in a different way, but those side effects of ecstasy, extraordinary joy, that will come and go. I know that's not what they tell you in the sales pitch for enlightenment, but that's actually what happens. And what happens is life feels quite ordinary in a different sense. It can feel blissful and extraordinary for a while, but after a while it just feels like, no, this is actually what life is. Very simple. And you look back at life lived before that, out of our mind, out of our judgments, out of our self-critical talk that we do to ourselves. That's altered reality. Believe things that aren't true. Imagine things that didn't happen. Fear things that will never happen. That's altered reality. So this point of zero gravity, how do we look at that? How do we gain more understanding about what that actually is? And this is where inquiry actually has a role. So in this spiritual endeavor, there's meditation, learning to be quiet, learning to notice what's happening in our mind. Has physiological benefits, but I think ultimately the main benefit is just really getting a good up-close and personal look to see how these minds actually work. So that has value, just that learning to be still long enough so that there's a greater chance of receptivity, seeing things at a more and more subtle level. So that's really helpful. However, meditation without inquiry can tend to bring us sort of more dreamlike character, where we're just into feeling peace and bliss, and there's no understanding to sort of ground that silence, you could say. So inquiry is what balances silent sitting meditation. And inquiry is basically getting to the bottom of things, asking questions that are important to us, questions that we're genuinely curious about. So there's a few things that are useful to understand. One is that don't waste your time with why questions. Okay, why did this happen? Why am I feel this way? Why? Don't. You can just don't waste your time. Okay, why? Yeah, okay. Because it's the mind's attempt to come up with a nice answer so it can go back to sleep. It's, oh, that's why. Oh, okay, good. Right. So the questions that are valuable are probably start with who or what. Who is this that's driving my car today? Who is this that's eating breakfast? Who is this that's brushing my teeth? Who is this that has this thought? Who is this that believes this emotion? So it's always directed back of like, who is it that's actually living this life? Right? That's a pretty good question. So it's any question that has juice for us in that vein, and we can ask if we just keep it to one question, like Ramana's "Who am I?" It can our mind just zones out after a while, because it becomes, unless we're really diligent about it, it can become more of a mantra. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Again. But if we're really curious about it, like, no, I really mean it. Who is this? What is actually living this life? I know I've got this history and these abilities and these foibles and these habits, but who's actually behind the show? That's the question. The assumption is, well, I am. Right? That's what we've all been taught. Right? It's the American way, rugged individual. But it's really the fundamental question in spirituality, who actually is living this life? And it's basically two possibilities, right? One is that you're a separate, autonomous individual running around in a big world. That's what we've been taught. Right? The other possibility is that there is something else that's energizing everything. Not only energizing, is everything. It's not. It's what enlivens these bodies. And ultimately, we find out is what is these bodies. a creation of source, creator, God, whatever terminology you like. But something, divine energy flowing through all of us. That's the other possibility. The implications of which of those is actually true, right? It doesn't really matter what we believe is true, does it? I mean, really, the only thing that actually matters is what is true. Not even what somebody says is true, or what some book said is true, but actually in your own direct experience. How does life feel when it feels like, no, I'm in this by myself, I gotta look out for myself, I'm responsible for everything that happens to me, I've got to watch out for myself, I've got to take care of myself, can't necessarily trust other people. So that's the, it plays out in different ways, but that's basically how an individual, as an individual, feels in this world. And there's an underlying, if we really sense into it, there's an underlying anxiety there, isn't there? It's like, I'm doing my best to sort of present myself to the world as being, competent, lovable, intelligent, whatever my thing is. But I know deep down it's not entirely true. It's how I present myself, yeah. Some of us are better at it than others, sure. But it still feels a little flimsy. The possibility that life itself is enlivening these bodies, is informing these bodies, has an intelligence that is not mind-based, has an intelligence that functions in the moment rather than out of memory, where we always respond from the same conditioned way. More creative, more sense of freedom. There's more joy to be in the world because there's not really an other. So this inquiry is really the core question in spirituality, is what is it that's living this life? Who am I really? Like, really? And again, it's not a belief. It's not like it is of any value to say, oh, okay, that sounds good. Consciousness is who I am. I'll go with that. Sounds good. That's actually less than helpful. Because it's just another belief, right? It's much more useful to hold it up as a possibility. Like, I wonder if that's actually could be what I am. Just that awareness. It's already fully functioning, everybody right now, right? So I wonder if that's what I know these bodies are here, I know these thoughts are here, but I wonder if what I fundamentally am is this consciousness aware of these thoughts, consciousness aware of looking out through these eyes, consciousness aware of moving in this body. I wonder if that could be true. I mean, sounds ridiculous, right? But when we were born, we didn't have a concept about who we were. We were fully beings, fully alive, fully aware, didn't know what any of it meant, but we were there for it. So the whole idea of what I am as a separate individual person, it was taught to us. It's taught to everybody, as far as I could tell. Your name is Johnny. Oh, okay. Step one. You know, and then it's built on there. And we, you know, over a period of years, we believe it. Everybody believes it. But it's just exactly that. It's a belief. It's a belief. And we live our life as a result of believing that. And there's consequences to beliefs that we really believe about ourselves. There's consequences to those. Big consequences. For example, fear. If it's just you in the world, hey, it's scary out there. So, like, there's a lot of beliefs that we can have about ourselves. That belief about what I am is a separate self. That's the core. That's the core belief. So if we're going to direct inquiry, it should be directed in that direction. Buddhism, the first Eightfold Path, if I'm correct, is right perception, right view. So this is what we're talking about. The right perception. If the perception is no, I'm a separate person, that colors everything. I mean, if we recognize that the perceiver is whatever word you want to use, divine essence, being, consciousness, that's living this life, it's a fundamentally different perspective. And one of the ways, again, there's this two avenues to get there. One is to be in silence, to see what's there when we're not trying to make something else happen. We're not trying to justify ourselves. We're not trying to manage the future. We're not trying to resolve the past. We're not trying to solve psychological problems. We're just noticing what is present. So that's one avenue. The other avenue is using our mind in a creative way, directed basically towards itself. Like, is that thought really who I am? Is that belief really who I am? Is that opinion really true? Those kinds of questions tend to undermine the mind. So the mind, I know the mind tends to be the bad guy in a lot of spirituality. It's not the bad guy. It can actually be used very effectively in this, to just really look at what's happening here. It won't get us all the way there, but it will weaken the assumption that the mind has that it is in charge of the shop. The mind's a great tool, right? But it's when we use it for what it's really meant for logical thinking, for doing things, it's great at that, But if I woke up in the morning and, first thing I did is reached for the hammer next to my bedside stand and then carried around this hammer all day long. And when there's only one nail to hammer in the late afternoon, and then I carried my hammer around all day, and finally when I went to sleep at night, put it back on the nightstand, people would think, it's a great tool for a specific thing, right? When you don't need it, you can just sort of set it aside. So the mind is the same as that. It's great at what it does, but it's not so great at, trying to understand why I have all these psychological problems, why, someone at work said something about me, all of that energy that's spent using the mind for something that it's not particularly good at. And it's certainly, this space, this 0 point, isn't a mental construct. It's actually something that the mind won't actually participate in. It might, over time, grow to recognize it, respect it, but it won't participate in it because it can't. I mean, the mind, the mental thought process is constructed of concepts. Words are concepts. Sentences are concepts. Right? They're not actually what's happening. So the mind is a great tool to use when we need to use it. It's actually, when we recognize what we actually are, it becomes a more effective tool because it's not all worn out doing things that it's not meant to do. It's available when we need it. So this inquiry process is really devoting energy to the inquiry about what's actually true. And the movement to do that is, it can feel, on the lighter side, it can feel like curiosity, like, yeah, I wonder what that is. On the more gritty side, it can feel like, I've got to know what that is, It just got a hold of me and it's not letting go, and I've just got to know. And that can feel more, it can feel more uncomfortable, right? It can almost feel like, you just want that feeling to get resolved, to go away somehow. But the way I look at it is it's actually the divine sort of nudging us awake. Right? Sort of like you have a toothache, and at first it's just, I wonder if that's a toothache. It's not really anything significant. And then a week or so later, I'm saying, I really wonder whether that's a toothache. And then, if you don't do anything about it, 2 weeks later, it's, oh my God, this is killing me. I've got to do something about it. But it's actually the body's way of informing us something of value. It's like saying, hey, look at me, take care of this. This needs attention. So we can be annoyed at the ache, or we can be thankful that, there's something that telling us that before, half our jaws rotted away. And the same could be said of this sense of discomfort almost. Like I know in Buddhism they talk about discomfort as something to want to resolve, but it's actually your friend. Without discomfort, none of us would change. None of us would do anything else. It's like when when we feel like whatever that we're doing or thinking or believing isn't, is causing us discomfort, causing us pain, suffering. In this country, the tendency is, where's the pill? Make it go away. But it's actually informing us of something of value. Like, there's something that's not quite right. It's time to take a deeper look at that. Time to pay attention. So in that sense, this discomfort, this is really, really our friend. Is really to respect that. It's not to make the feeling go away. The same could be said of desire. A lot of times in spirituality, you think, you don't want to desire anything. That's bad, right? Anybody try to do that? I would say the opposite. That if there's desire there, use it. Use that energy. It's something that's energizes you. Rather than try to suppress that energy, actually use that energy, but just direct it in a transformative kind of way. It's energy. But a lot of times that energy is misdirected, so we look for things outside of us to fill something that feels empty within. Next relationship, better car, more money, more fame, more respectability, whatever the drug is. But when we see that desire is actually trying to fill this void, then the question is, what's the void? Right? That's a good question. What is this void that's demanding to be filled? And who's doing that? Good question, huh? But that's what it can feel like sometimes, right? Like just, and it can be, I'll just have some ice cream, that'll do it for 10 minutes. Anything. So anything that arises like that has energy behind it's worth looking at, really, really inquiring. I wonder what that is. What's the source of that? But when we're seeking it, the normal direction of seeking is, I am looking for something that's not here. So it's this I, whatever that is looking for something, seeking something somewhere. So the suggestion is just to turn that around, because there's a point of origin there, like there's some motivation for whatever this I thing is to seek, to find something. So rather than look out in the world with the 10,000 things that are possible out there, or look into our psychological lives, which are 10,000 things there as well, we can just say, I wonder what is it that's looking? Rather than go in this direction, you're just turning it around and going this direction. What's the origin of that movement to seek, to understand, to find, to gain peace? Where's that origin? Who is that? So the whole idea of teaching this subject is The only value it has is to say, you know, if you're interested, the door's over that way. That's the value of it. It's just a time saver to maybe look in a particular direction. But you're the one that has to walk through the door. Nobody else can do that for you. Not the greatest guru that ever lived. It's something that we all have the opportunity in this lifetime to discover for ourselves. That's the opportunity. But the direction of the questioning is to really look closely at what is living this life. For real. Like your own life. Doesn't matter what anybody else ever said. It's just like, directly, what is that? Beyond any belief. It's not dependent on belief. How could it be? If who you are was dependent on a belief, you'd have to keep that belief in mind every possible second. Be like on an air support system. You know, if you're away from it for a minute, you'd expire. If who you were dependent on a belief, any belief, who you are is what you are already. That's the good news. You know, it's actually not an attainment. It's just a recognition. It's a recognition of what was already there. And you only have to give up one thing, actually. What's that?
I said, look out, here it comes.
The only thing you have to give up is a belief that you're a separate self. You can't give it up by just having a belief that you're not a separate self. That doesn't work. But it's just really investigating. Is that, you know, what sense into what feels more real? This whole storyline I've got going about myself, or this difficult to describe but ever-present sense of just like, yeah, there's an aliveness here, there's a presence here. I don't have to do anything to construct it. It's there every time I stop and notice. It's not dependent on what anybody else thinks about me or what I think about myself. It's just present. The first glimpse can feel empty because it's empty of what?
Belief.
Me. So the me's not going to like this. From the me's perspective, it's like, no, you don't want to go there. Dark, scary, unknown. Don't risk it. Life as you know it might not be great, but at least you know what it is. It's a familiar prison, so let's stick with that. So it's actually an irrational movement to seek what we're talking about here. The mind can't come up with any good reason to do this. So that's why the universe needs to use this sort of discomfort, nudging. But what appears at first to just be empty Like not much going on. It's sort of like when if you've been outside in the bright lights and lots happening, and you go inside a dark room. At first you can't see anything, it just looks void. Then after a while, your eyes get used to it, and you can find your way around, and it becomes the new normal. But it's sort of like in Zen they love to use scary language like, the void and emptiness and non-existence and words like that. And the reason for it is to discourage people from conceptualizing it. Because that's what the mind, again, tries to do. Like, oh, I get it. It's about consciousness. All right, I got it. Great. The mind's back in control. It's turned it into a concept. It's something that it can relax about. But the actual experience of it is unknown, right? It is. But when we spend a little time there, and this isn't a faraway place. This is just like right now. If we just stop for a second, it's right here. Not far away. But when at first it's like, okay, well, what's the big deal? It's quiet. There's a certain peacefulness about it. But when we sense more into it, it's like, yeah, it's more than that. It's not just dark and quiet. It's more like it's got a presence to it. It's got an aliveness to it. And it doesn't happen overnight, but after a while, this presence or awareness, we discover has an intelligence to it too. Intelligence about life, how that life lives through us, what we find we're able to do or express or be, or creativity arising through us. We find that life has an intelligence, that has a movement, has a wisdom. It's not a set of knowledge. It's just arising moment to moment as appropriate for that particular moment. So at first it feels empty, sort of like the gates, see who they can scare off. Like they used to do at the old Zen monasteries, somebody knock at the door and they'd just yell insults to them and try to get them to go away. Sort of only the most persistent ones that come in, and then they'd make them wash pots for 20 years. Yeah. Anyway, that's the purpose of the silence. It's also the purpose of the inquiry, is to really focus on what this self actually is. It's not, we don't have to get rid of it. Any attempt to get rid of it just reinforces it. Like the question, how do you get a bird out of an empty cage? It's like, it doesn't actually exist. It's something that we've constructed. We're not talking about bodily perceptions, sense of sight, sense of smell. That's fine. But this sense of it's me as separate from the world. that sense, that belief that that's how it is at the core of what we're talking about. That's what has to be investigated. And we can see how that sense of self arises many times during the day. You know, something happens, we have a feeling, we have a thought, like, who's thinking that thought? You know, who's having that feeling? Who's drinking this cup of coffee? You know, we can ask the question in a million different ways. You know, who is it that's worrying about the future? Who is it that is hanging on to this past story? Lots of ways to ask the question. And every time we see that we're sort of contracting into a separate self, you can feel it, right? Contraction, tightness in the belly. You know, when it gets severe. You just notice that. Okay, there's that sense of self operating again. So a perfect time to really look at that. I wonder what's causing that. What belief is operational that's causing me to feel that way? Could it be that I believe that that person shouldn't have said that to me? I would do it. It doesn't take a lot of beliefs to cause contraction, right? And any one good belief would do. So anyway, that's as I see the purpose of the silent sitting or meditation combined with the inquiry. It keeps one balance as the other. If it's only inquiry and without the silent sitting, it can get too heady, right? Yet it's a tendency to get too conceptual. If it's just the sitting without the inquiry, it can tend to get a little dreamy. You know, we can find ourselves chasing states of peace and happiness and bliss, and as if that were the goal. It's not the goal. Maybe the concept there may be more and more times of just contentment and a sense of fulfillment or a sense of ease in our own skin, those kind of feelings. It's not mind-blowing bliss. But that can happen. It's just not permanent.